for conflict resolution, peacekeeping, and peacebuilding. And just to say a few words, we were established in 1994 as a regional center for training on peacekeeping in Africa. And then in 2017, our mandate was extended to be international, just not Africa. And our peacebuilding was added to our mandate. So we have a foot in the peacekeeping world, very strongly engaged in it, including as the secretariat of an international association called the International Association of Peacekeeping Training Centers, IAPTC. But we also have a very strong foot in the peacebuilding world, including as the secretariat of a platform called the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development, which mainly is a peacebuilding platform focused on peace and security and development challenges in Africa. We're delighted to be engaged in this forum for more than one reason. I think this forum has a really great importance of offering such an important space for discussing the discussions that will shape conversations and global agenda on peace operations. So it's an extremely timely conversation to have. We've heard that this morning. As Egypt, we have been part of this forum for many years, and we're very delighted to be so. Egypt is a top contributing country to UN peacekeeping, the 7th largest, and also the chair of the C34 committee in New York for many years. We're also a member of the Policy Advisory Committee of the Challenges Forum, and very delighted to be so. I mentioned the Aswan Forum. Sweden is also a strategic partner of the forum, and we very much appreciate our cooperation with Sweden in this context. And we had actually at the last Aswan Forum a session with the Secretariat of the Challenges Forum on UN and AU cooperation on multilaterally on peace and security, where we also had a number of our speakers today who were also contributed to it, in particular under Secretary General Lacroix. So we're continuing a conversation for us and a partnership and a collaboration with Challenges Forum at the previous Aswan Forum last June. And as I said, we're having at the end of this month the annual meeting of this very important association of peacekeeping training centers. So we hope also to take from here some of the conversations towards that forum that will be held in Bangladesh at the end of the month. The topic of this high-level panel is extremely important and timely, and we have also heard mentions towards this issue in the opening statements today: the future of peace operations and peace and security and regional peace and security arrangements. We have a wonderful set of distinguished speakers to address this very important topic that it comes back again in many conversations. We had the UN General Assembly also last week, where this was touched upon. The Secretary General in his address highlighted the importance of strengthening both peacekeeping and the role of regional organizations. So how to work in tandem towards that. We know that, as it has been mentioned, that there are a growing number of peace operations that are being deployed under different regional arrangements, particularly in Africa. They were called ad hoc. I'm not sure I like this term of ad hoc operations, but it's something that we can also reflect on. How do they work and intertwine with UN peacekeeping, with other peace operations? Without further delay, then, to discuss this very important topic, we start with Under Secretary Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the top UN official for peacekeeping, with a very distinguished career in this area and in multilateralism in various capacities, including as director of the United Nations Department and the French Foreign Ministry, DPR in the French mission in New York, ambassador in Sweden. And actually, we share something in common, that we studied at the same university or place, Sciences Po, in Paris. Followed by that, Assistant Secretary General Elizabeth Spehar, also delighted to have you with us. You are the top peace-building official of the UN, a very important also responsibility at the Department of Political and Peace Building Affairs, and you were also previously the Secretary General Special Representative, head of the UN Peacekeeping Force in Cyprus. So I think Cynthia also will be joining us. She is the African Youth Ambassador for Peace for Southern Africa, and very actively engaged on something called the Youth Peace and Security Agenda that is very important also for our conversation. We had the pleasure also of having her at the Aswan Forum, so I'm looking forward also to have her join us. But I'll start with you, Under Secretary General Lacroix. So you think you've been following this the discussions around what we heard this morning. We have in the horizon the summit of the future, the new agenda for peace of the Secretary General. So how do we reflect on these milestones coming up? How we can best support and complement the evolving regional peace and security architecture in the context of multilateralism and global solidarity? How do you see the future of multilateral peace operations in face of all of the challenges we heard today? I'm sure that you are very familiar with them. And how do we ensure that the regional peace and security arrangements are in sync with UN, with the UN is doing, and leveraging on mutual advantages and capabilities for the broader objective of strengthening peace and security? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Abdel Latif, and a very good morning. Thank you very much to the organizers, particularly USI and Challenges Forum, and with all protocol observed. It's really a pleasure to be here in India, which is one of our strongest supporter, not only to its contribution, but also to its commitment to the UN. Now, we heard a number of very pertinent presentations this morning, and I want to subscribe to everything that was said. And it was, I think, heartening to hear from the last, the keynote speech that, however daunting the challenges are, not only to peacekeeping, but to our efforts in peace and security, the added value of peace operations, particularly UN peace operation, needs to be emphasized and highlighted. However, of course, we have to adapt to these challenges. And to me, there are essentially three challenges. The first one is the most important one, is the political challenge, the vision of our international community. The second one really is the evolving nature of conflict, and related to that is the evolution of the enablers of conflict, particularly the technological evolution, and all of this, of course, very much interlinked. The key challenge that we're facing is the divided international community. When peacekeeping has succeeded, and by succeeded, I mean when peacekeeping reach or can reach what I call the ultimate goals of peacekeeping, which is to leave behind an improved political and security situation. This happened many times in many places, many countries, Cambodia, El Salvador, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, and so on and so forth. But the conditions for this success were the existence of a peace agreement and the existence of a real true commitment from the parties to actually implement, abide by their commitments, and an international community strong enough and united enough to support the parties in their commitment. We don't have that anymore. We have a divided international community, which is a divided Security Council, which is united enough to extend our mandate. However, this happens more and more with no unanimity, which is a problem in itself. But neither the membership at large nor the Security Council is united enough to provide us with what we need most, which is strong political support to political efforts that are indispensable to the ultimate success of peacekeeping. And without this, we are left with trying to achieve what I call the intermediate goals of peacekeeping, which are important, which make a difference, like protection of civilian, monitoring ceasefire, trying to build national capacity, but it's not enough. And it leads to the situation where all our peacekeeping missions that are currently deployed have no significant prospect of significant improvement in the political processes that is related to these mission settings. Now, that implies that if we have a divided international community and a divided Security Council in particular, we need to try to make up for that, to ensure that at least there will be some momentum and some dynamic, some level of dynamic in the political efforts. And that's why the work with other partners, particularly the regional, sub-regional organization, is more important than ever. Because first of all, there is an evident complementarity, which has been there for quite some time. But if we have a divided Security Council, then how can we mitigate that? How can we use other forms of leverage? And here, cooperation with the AU, with the regional, sub-regional organization, ECOWAS and the like is critical. But, and we're seeing this in many processes that we're currently follow, such as the one, for example, in Mali, in the Sahel, or in the DR Congo. But in order for that to be effective, it implies that those regional, sub-regional organizations have to be strong and have to be strengthened. And there's there are discrepancies among those regional, sub-regional organizations. Some of them are relatively strong, or at least have a strong political clout, others less so. The second thing is the evolving nature of conflict, and this has been, of course, mentioned several times. We are dealing with a diversifying set of drivers of conflict, factors that are not new in itself, but in themselves, but they have a growing influence on the conflicts we're dealing with. The impact of climate change, terrorism, organized crime, illegal activities, and exploitation, illegal exploitation of natural resources. And I think we, as a collectivity, the UN, but also the multilateral system as a whole, should do more on this. I'm not saying that it's for peacekeeping operation to deal with these drivers of conflict, certainly not with climate change. We can mitigate the impact of climate change, and we have several programs in partnership with other agency funds and programs to do that. But, and we also build capacities that help host government to deal with terrorism or organized crime, but we need to do more as multilateral system, as as UN, certainly. Our conflict have a much, in many cases, I think most cases, a much stronger regional dimension. The conflict in Mali is largely impacted by a regional conflict in the Sahel, and in the DR Congo, we are facing what is, of course, a situation which important regional, local, and national elements, but it's largely a regional crisis, almost a regional conflict, for which a peacekeeping operation deployed in one of the member states involved is having a hard time, by definition, addressing these regional dimensions. And I think that sort of emphasizes, again, the importance of working with regional outfits, regional, sub-regional organization. But that also raises more acutely the issue of peacekeeping with no peace to keep, which is a real challenge when we see situations in the two countries that I mentioned. And in fact, I think that most of our peacekeeping operations have a deteriorated political and security climate, even if we compare with 2 or 3 years ago. Now, in order to deal with peacekeeping in these challenged security environment, we have to do two things. One is to strengthen our own tool, which is peacekeeping. We need robust peacekeeping. I think we need to make sure that we have the right mindset, training, equipment. We have Chapter 7 mandate. They're important because they're key to protect civilians. So we need to be proactive and robust. This is a key message. But on the other hand, peacekeeping operations have their limits. They're not peace enforcement outfit, and they will never be for a variety of reasons. And therefore, others should do peace enforcement. Hence the importance of promoting the role of regional enforcement forces. The UN supports the strengthening of particularly African enforcement forces, including with predictable and sustainable financing. although I have to say that personally, I think that we haven't really gone far enough in this discussion. I think there's a sort of standoff where the UN and a couple of member states, certainly the African member states, support the idea that African enforcement forces should be supported with assessed contribution, and a number of member states are opposed to that view. But I think that the debate and the discussion on that topic should go much further than that, because financing is important, but I don't think financing is the only element. If in order to get armed forces from various countries to work together, to coordinate, to be effective in their collective work, particularly if it's about enforcement, there's more that needs to be done and more to be explored. And I hope that we will go beyond, as I said, the current standoff regarding these issues. Now, technology is absolutely fundamental. We are facing with the impact of the use of these digital technology by those who do not wish us to succeed. Fake news, disinformation, more sophisticated attacks and all that kind of things. And we need to be able to respond to that by improving our digital literacy. We have a so-called strategy for the digital transformation of peacekeeping, and India is very supportive to that strategy, other member states as well. We need to use digital technology to be more aware of the environment in which we operate. And we also need to use technology in order to better protect our peacekeepers and better protect the population we serve, which is really, these are two sides of the same coin. Now, I don't want to take too long, so I will end with these two ideas. First of all, the history of peacekeeping is one of ebbs and flows, so it's very hard to predict what the future will be. I think we're currently in a stage where, because of the division of the international community, there's obviously less space or less, the atmospheric condition that are needed for the creation of new peacekeeping operations are not there. In most cases, but we could be surprised, because on the other hand, we continue to hear calls for the deployment of UN peacekeepers from various corners, including from corners which are currently affected by active conflict. Hence, I think that suggests that there's still a high level of credibility and expectation from UN peacekeeping. The second thing is that we're likely to see a further diversification of UN peace operations. This has been the trend over the last decades, with the operation that range from small outfits with limited mandates about military observation, monitoring ceasefire, towards this big, large, multi-dimensional mission. I think we will see even further diversification, with the further diversification in the partnership that are indispensable to these peace operations. I will stop here for now, and I really look forward to the discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Undersecretary General. And I think you have walked us through, your responses to many of the challenges that were mentioned this morning. And I think you did a fantastic job. It is often stressed about the divisions in the Security Council and how they undermine, the political support needed. But I think it is also at the same time a call for the broader membership that is supportive of multilateralism and of UN peacekeeping to mobilize political support for peacekeeping at this very critical time. Egypt is vested in that, but also with other countries beyond traditional also geographic boundaries, Sweden, I see Japan also, and many other countries. So I think that is, and these countries also to invest in creative initiatives to support that need to mobilize political will around this key multilateral tool. I'm also very happy you brought up the issue of financing particularly of regional peace operations, because that's when we talk about their effectiveness, it's an issue that comes up quite immediately. And you're totally right. I think there is scope to move in that discussions, and we have had actually transition to peace building, a General Assembly resolution on peace building recently that was quite a breakthrough in the debates around this issue, and gives us hope that multilateralism can, when countries with goodwill come together, can deliver results. So transitioning now to you, Elizabeth. I think, as we have heard also this morning, the ability, there are things that peacekeeping can do, and the Secretary just mentioned it. There's things also that is not as well as equipped to do in terms of the drivers of conflict, in terms of some of the conditions to ensure that we have lasting peace. That there is now a recognition that these must be hand in hand, they must go together. So how can the UN, through its peace operations, but also through its regional bureau and its country teams, play a more catalytic role in building resilience, harnessing opportunities, and ultimately, unleashing these people-centered solutions that contribute to lasting peace in all these situations? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And let me also start by thanking very much the United Service Institution of India and the Folke Bernadotte Academy for convening us here these next couple of days at the Challenges Forum. I'm also really pleased to be here in India and be able to also recognize the very important contributions of this country, not only to peacekeeping, but also to peace building as a key member of the Peacebuilding Commission and other fora, and look very much forward to our exchanges in a few moments. Very broad and important question, and very happy to follow on the remarks of my colleague Jean-Pierre Lacroix. I'm representing the Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs here. And since the Secretary General's reforms of the Peace and Security Pillar in 2019, we have been joined at the hip also with the peacekeeping part of the shop with joint regional desks. And I think that was a very important development in the organization, because I think that one of the things we need to focus on as UN at least is making sure that we're increasingly joined up and fit for purpose. And I hope that we will get a chance to talk a little bit more about the new agenda for peace, because I think we need to seize that opportunity to make sure that the tools that we do have, both those that are anchored in the charter and the institutions that we've developed over the years, that they truly are adapted to the both traditional and the many new challenges that we're facing, and which were so eloquently outlined by Comfort Aero and others in the opening, and also by Jean-Pierre a moment ago. So just to situate where a little bit some of the tools that DPPA brings to the table, and then maybe to focus on, as was requested, sort of where are some opportunities, what are the things we need to focus on in terms of building, playing a more catalytic role in building peace and resilience, harnessing opportunities, and unleashing the potential of people-centered resolutions. Only those three very easy categories. So basically, at DPPA, we backstop, we support the special political missions, which I think are very important, if you will, complement to the peacekeeping operations. In fact, some of them could rather be confused with peacekeeping operations. I don't think there's a hard line between them. But I think one characteristic of a number of our special political missions is that they do, in particular, spearhead the UN's efforts on the ground in terms of preventive diplomacy, and also trying to resolve through preventive diplomacy certain ongoing conflicts, or to support countries in politically difficult transitions. So we have special envoys, for example, for Yemen and Syria. But we also have a mediation division supporting mediation efforts around the world, supporting electoral affairs. And since the reforms of 2019 that kicked in 2019, the Peacebuilding Support Office that I represent most directly here is part of that architecture. So we bring those tools to the table. Where do I think that we need to invest more in order to try to get to these very, very lofty goals that have been outlined in the question I was given. Well, first of all, I want to focus on partnerships and collaboration. Everyone, I think, has mentioned partnership in one way or another up until now in this event, and it's very clear that no entity or no part of an entity can go it alone. So I see this issue of collaboration and partnerships as important, both within our UN system and also with the broader entities around the world within the UN system. And the Secretary General has been quite clear on this. He sees that we're still not joined up enough in terms of bringing what I might call the upstream prevention efforts of preventive diplomacy, mediation, and so forth that DPPA specializes in, together with what one might call the longer term structural prevention of what our agencies, funds, and programs do, which is basically to try to deliver sustainable development, to build capacities on the ground, also to foster inclusion in societies. And we've seen increasingly that one cannot go without the other, and certainly peacekeeping operations are also part of this equation. As Jean-Pierre was saying a moment ago, stabilizing or providing protection on the ground is an important starting point. But if it does not continue through a continuum of also trying to sustain that perhaps only temporary peace, we will be back again with peacekeeping operations and even more difficult circumstances a few years down the line. So as the UN, we have to join up the tools that we have. One of the roles of the Peacebuilding Fund, which our office, the PBSO, manages for the Secretary General, is precisely to try to link up with providing resources, these different tools that we have at the organization. But of course, the partnerships externally are also very important. And we've talked a number of times of our linkages with regional organizations and so forth, as well as sub-regional organizations. And I think it's safe to say that there the UN has been doing better. So both in terms of the peacekeeping operations, as well as the special political missions and our agencies, funds, and programs on the ground, I think we've increasingly been strengthening our relationships with the important regional and sub-regional entities around the world who are closer to the ground, often have an earlier perhaps and perhaps deeper understanding of the challenges on the ground, and sometimes have greater legitimacy than we do in the eyes of the local populations. I think a key area that we need to work on more is that we have to work more on getting to a shared understanding of the root causes of the conflicts that we are trying to help the countries and the regions resolve, or what are the root causes that could lead tensions into open conflict. We need to share data much better. We need to share information. We need to try to work towards joint analysis of a situation, particular situation on the ground, and then definitely coordinate and align as much as possible our responses. I also want to mention other external partners that we're doing more to work with, and I think they're key in terms of the larger peace and security landscape, and that is the international financial institutions, also the regional development banks, and even the private sector. So this is something that I can say our office is working on directly. So for example, when it comes to the IFIs, such as the World Bank and the IMF, something that we are finding as critical is to make sure that we are strategically aligned and that we are assessing a situation on the ground with a same or similar lens, and that we're ensuring that what we are doing on the ground is peace positive, and that it is aligning with the peace priorities on the ground. I mean, the IFIs have a lot of clout, and I think we've seen in the past how sometimes, certainly inadvertently, their action on the ground could actually go in the opposite direction of peace. So those are critical partnerships, but also the private sector, and that would be an interesting subject for a panel or an afternoon alone. But we see how when it comes to investing in peace, investing in sustainable development, certainly the private sector can bring a lot to bear, but they, as profit-making vehicles, they're not exactly the same type of partner, and we need to see how we can channel their possible role in consolidating peace in different contexts. And something we're exploring are private-public partnerships that can deliver peace-building outcomes on the ground. So partnerships, collaboration are key, both within UN and with our external partners, with external actors. Now, one of the questions was about how do we get to people-centered solutions? Well, the obvious response to that is that we need bottom-up approaches. And so we have to really involve the local communities and civil society actors in our work. And I know that the peacekeeping operations are increasingly looking at how they engage with the local communities. Comfort Aero from the International Crisis Group mentioned that at the very least, peacekeeping operations or peace operations in general need to explain more to local communities why we are there, what we are doing, what we can do, what we can't do. But I would take that even further. It's not enough just to inform and communicate. We also need to engage and involve. So we have to realize, as Jean-Pierre was saying, we are supposed to be a finite presence on the ground. And if we are not helping to build capacity on the ground, to build something sustainable, and to bring in those local communities and across the board, including especially those who are traditionally marginalized, who haven't had a voice up until now, then we are not fully doing our job. So that goes for peacekeeping operations, for special political missions, really for everything we do on the ground. And there, I don't have time to go into what we are doing in this area, but I can say that, again, from the peace building perspective, we are investing increasingly in local peace building and trying to see how we can support key local actors on the ground as directly as possible. And then the third thing that I, of course, have to mention, which was also mentioned, is financing. So if we really want to advance in the areas that we have been talking about, we have to have more adequate, predictable, and sustainable financing for peace. And I just want to bring out one statistic from a very recent report of the OECD on the state of fragility around the world. And they were mentioning in the report that was just launched in New York a couple of weeks ago that between 2010 and 2020, only 12% of official development assistance that was going to fragile states went to peace activities. And of that money, of that percentage, only 4% went to conflict prevention. Now, I'm very happy that within the UN membership and more broadly, conflict prevention seems to be the concept du jour. But are we investing enough in it? Do we understand well enough how we do it? Are we sharpening our tools for it? Those are important questions. So financing is very important, and our estimable chair mentioned a groundbreaking resolution on financing for peace building that was just approved by the General Assembly, which underscores that the membership does understand that there's a critical gap in financing for peace building. This was a unanimously supported resolution, and that this somehow needs to be solved. So I think we need to see how we could leverage that particular resolution to get more support sustainably for prevention and building peace. And just to conclude, back on the issue of prevention, there was also another landmark report called Pathways for Peace, which the United Nations and the World Bank penned, and it was launched in March of 2018. So it's almost 5 years old, but I think it's just as relevant today as it was at the time. And one of the things that it made the case for was absolutely investing more in prevention. And they built an argument with some empirical evidence that for every $1 that you spend on prevention today, you can save at least $16 in the future when you have to clean up the mess of the conflict that ensued because there were not enough preventive efforts taken at the outset, not to mention lives that are saved, livelihoods, and so forth. That was for almost 5 years ago. We still haven't learned that lesson. I think we need to drill down into that. And so let me link that again to the new agenda for peace and the summit of the future, which is going to be held a high-level summit among member states in 2024. This is something the Secretary General has been promoting through his Our Common Agenda report that came out last fall. And basically what he is trying to do with the membership is to relaunch our thinking about what is the world, what type of world we're living in right now, what are the challenges, and how we need to truly pivot to be fit for purpose for the primary role of the United States, of the United Nations, which is the maintenance of peace and security in the world. So let us all use that opportunity to see how we need to improve the tools that we already have. How do we need to think out of the box? How are we going to address these multi-dimensional overlapping threats and challenges that many have mentioned today? And how do we do it in a joined up way, both within the system and beyond the UN family, because otherwise we will not be able to address them satisfactorily. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And really, I think you took us on a panoramic view of all the other tools, the important tools that also the UN is working with to address some of the challenges we heard this morning, and looking at also at the future. I couldn't help listening to both our intervention this morning about a document whose anniversary actually happens this year, the 40 years anniversary of something called the Agenda for Peace of Secretary General Boutros Ghali, who was a fellow citizen of mine, and who in 1992, at a very also critical moment in international affairs, launched this Agenda for Peace, which brought together for the first time at a high policy level, conflict prevention, peacekeeping, and peace building. But it was still a policy kind of at the policy level, and we see it's impressive. It's amazing to see how much that has translated operationally now with the reforms of 2019, what the Secretary General is doing, innovations such as the Peacebuilding Fund. We have really gone a very long way in that discussion, and I'm very pleased with that. I think we also tend to, put everything on the shoulders of the UN and the Secretariat to take this forward, but I think also countries and other stakeholders and this kind of discussions have also a role in contributing to advancing ideas and initiatives to further take this forward. Because Elizabeth mentioned partnerships as a very important concept to take forward. We all agree on that. I think everybody agrees on it, but it's the how, it's where, with whom, under which tools and financing. And partnerships need to be embedded in tools, as you mentioned, the joint assessments, for example, with the IFIs in some cases, in financing, in really concrete structures. Otherwise, it's very difficult to move them forward. And in our case in particular, we have this experience with the Aswan Forum. We are a peace and security institutions, but when we came to address the broader challenges, we realized we need to have with us the IFIs, the World Bank, etc., and other institutions to work around this issue. So still a lot ahead, I think, and hopefully we have in the discussion and in these 2 days meetings some further ideas to advance some of these strategic priorities we all agree with. Without further delay, I'll very happy that we were joined by Cynthia Chigwenya. Very nice to see you, Cynthia. I'm very glad that you're able to make it. You are an African Youth Ambassador for Peace for Southern Africa. We met a couple of months ago, only about last June in Cairo. Very nice to see you again. And you work in a growing agenda on the youth, peace, and security, and who is taking at the becoming really at the forefront of peace and security effort, and I think all coming to a common realization about that. From that point of view, how do you see, Cynthia, particularly how the UN and regional organizations such as the African Union can, in a practical level, work better together in the context of including in the context of peace operations, to make sure that, for example, they can, when we're talking about people-centered approaches, this is an important component of it. How can they contribute to advancing that and making sure they are in sync and in complementarity? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Abdel, for the kind introduction, and good morning, everyone. We're going to do this again. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. First of all, I'll start by apologizing. I wasn't making a grand entrance by coming to the stage when everyone else was here. I only arrived a few hours ago, and I did my best to get here as soon as I could. Thank you very much to the Challenges Forum and to USI for the invitation and for also giving us the opportunity to sit here and discuss. Oftentimes, we hear youth across the continent and the globe protesting that anything for us without us is against us. So I can easily go back and say young people represented at the Challenges Forum 2022. To respond to the question that I had, I'll start off by touching briefly on the presentations that we got from the previous panelists, and bringing in sort of a youth perspective to it, and then complementing that with the complexities of youth participation in peace building and peacekeeping, and then finally how the UN and the AU can practically partner to ensure that there's representation, but also local buy-in of peace initiatives within our respective countries and internationally. So firstly, when the panelists spoke, and the Secretary General, Mr. Lacroix, he spoke about fake news and disinformation, and that is critical, particularly because of the number of youth that actually use social media platforms. And that is just one of the reasons why we cannot afford to continuously have peace conversations without youth being represented. Apart from misinformation and disinformation, we also heard from Assistant Secretary General Elizabeth, who spoke about financing in fragile states, and particularly from the African context. And it came to me as not a surprise that only 10% went into peace building, and just a fraction of that, which is 4%, actually went into conflict prevention. And the reason that is the case is because peace building must be understood as a complex issue that is related to other aspects of development, particularly economics. So if you're living in a context or in a country where there are issues such as starvation and in terms of response to climate change or some of the climate shocks, then it becomes difficult to prioritize peace building and peacekeeping. So in response to that, I would say that peace building and conflict resolution must be understood in the broader perspective of development goals, where none can succeed when the other one is not prioritized. So there's need to collectively prioritize development goals. Now, to speak specifically to the complexities of youth participation when it comes to peace building and peacekeeping, it is a very high level or very protocol guarded space. And I say this, I'm sure a lot of us that are in this space are very much aware that we cannot have some of the major generals at a young age. And that is the situation we have. In Southern Africa, where I'm from, for instance, in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado province, the first instance when the insurgencies started was to send the military. And we see that reflective of our responses to conflicts across the continent. It's either there's a high level engagement between presidents, between ministers, and at the very end, we see then inclusion of different stakeholders. But what that does is that it doesn't respond to conflicts, because we're seeing this sort of changing nature of conflicts, where young people are participating in conflicts, not simply because they believe in some ideology, but their economic incentives, and there's high unemployment, and then young people resort to joining an insurgency group to make up for that economic shortcoming. So I think there is high need to actually engage young people at the onset of conflicts because of peer-to-peer engagement, where when we're speaking about reintegration and disarmament of young people who have joined these extremist groups, we're able to take their peers and they dialogue with them and find out why they joined insurgency groups. And I'm happy to see Mr. David from ISS, because the Institute for Security Studies actually conducted a study on youth extremism in Southern Africa. And this is one of their findings, that there's actually economic incentives given to young people to participate. And for that reason, we cannot continue to sideline or be exclusive when it comes to resolving conflicts. Otherwise, we're just dealing with sort of the symptoms and not really the root causes of why people are engaging in conflict. Now, finally, just looking at some of the solutions to the issues I raised, and that is where a direct response to the question that was posed by Ambassador Abdel Latif comes in. It is, how can there be meaningful partnerships so that these shortcomings we're seeing in responding to conflicts in our different regions can be addressed? And the first is, I think I am justified in saying there's over partnering with NGOs. And we have seen several times the civil society organizations as a panacea to several development challenges that we have. And by so doing, especially from the African context, there's alienation of the role of the state and the role that governments can play. And yet we're gearing towards local ownership of initiatives, local buy-in of peacekeeping operations and peacekeeping missions. But I would say in response to what you highlighted, Assistant Secretary General Elizabeth, it is that we need to be intentional about partnering with governments. And governments should be the ones, as a state or as an entity, that communicates the NGOs that are operating within their country. Granted that governments have got their own challenges and the relationship with citizens is not always clear or not always a rosy relationship. But I think what partnering with governments does is that it legitimizes peace building initiatives and peacekeeping initiatives. And not only that, it serves to strengthen the relations between UN entities or international entities such as the African Union or the United Nations with the governments and then with the people. So the reestablishment of that legitimacy of the government as an entity within the country. Apart from that, it also allows for policy continuity, because oftentimes when we partner with NGOs, tomorrow that NGO does not operate in a specific country. What do? We find another organization to partner with, we pump funds into that organization until it can't sustain itself, and we continuously repeat that. But by partnering with the national government, we're looking at longer term policies that can be continued despite shifts in terms of who is in charge of that entity. So in a nutshell, I think that is the response to how this partnership can be enhanced to ensure that there's policy continuity, but also legitimacy of different peace building and peacekeeping initiatives. And in terms of formulating the new agenda for peace, I've mentioned in my opening statement that this cannot be done without inclusive of not only young people, but persons with disabilities and also persons from marginalized and minority communities. And we've seen that exclusions in various cases, the extremes being the case of Rwanda in 1994, where when initiatives are exclusive, they actually bridge to more conflicts and grievances than we can deal with. And then finally, I will refer to the words of the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, who said, the objectives of development, human rights and security must be pursued together, otherwise none will succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. And you know, I should have mentioned it actually, listening to you and also paying tribute to the African Union, because actually you're a part, I think, of 5 ambassadors of the African Union, 5 African youth ambassadors for each region of the African Union. And it's a very interesting and impressive group. And we had the pleasure to host them in Cairo for the ASWAN Forum. And they were remarkably articulate and made a very useful contribution to our discussions, and we have seen another example of that now with your intervention, Cynthia. So thank you for that. And on your remarks, just to I think you touched upon a number of important issues in terms of the inclusivity and also the continuity, and I think also reflecting about what Elizabeth was saying. From what we see, at least in our engagement, the issue of weak institutions is also a key challenge, maybe not sufficiently mentioned, including this morning. The weakness of institutions in many parts of the world aggravate fragilities, vulnerabilities, their inability to consolidate peace and to advance their efforts. So in sync with strengthening and also investing in local communities, investing in institutions is also equally important. And I think this is something that you also highlighted and alluded to for the sake of the policy continuity also. So I think we've had really very stimulating interventions, each covering a different aspect of the topic we're addressing today. We will now open, I think, the floor to the audience and to some comments. And I think starting with some comments from the floor with someone who has already, so Cynthia mentioned, David Johannes, senior researcher at IISS, the Institute of Security Studies from South Africa, also an institution that we work closely with in the context of the Aswan Forum. A pleasure to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers of the Challenge Forum for giving us the opportunity to take part in this forum. We are particularly very happy that the Challenge Forum is giving a particular attention to the issue of the increasing role of regions, especially in terms of discussing future peace operations. And this is for two reasons. One, regions are the theaters of the evolving conflict dynamics, but most importantly, as responders to the multiple crises. And this evolution is actually much more pronounced and visible when it comes to the Africa and to the role of the African Union and its regional organization as responders to complex peace and security threats, notably counterterrorism efforts. So beyond navel gazing and problem analysis, we are here to suggest some bold recommendations for the future. So in our view, the future of peace operations at least hinges on two major issues. One, in terms of finding sustainable financing to African peace operations, which has been mentioned by a number of speakers. But the first, in terms of to unlock the deadlock to UN financing of AU mission, I think a number of forums like this have been held, and we can continue to debate about the issues for hours and hours. But the truth of the matter remains that the nature of the threats outpaces or outmatch the snail pace of our discussions. So we really need to act on that one beyond the bureaucratic issues. So the issue of financing has been going on maybe for the last 5-6 years. So we really need to move fast because the threats are not really waiting for us to find concrete solution to the challenge. The second one is the issue of partnerships, and notably the partnership between the UN and the African Union. We know that a number of progress have been made in this regard as well, but the critical task that lies ahead is in terms of how do we insulate the operational aspect of the partnership from the contentious politics of the P5 on the operational level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and for these two important points you highlighted, including the last one. I think some of our speakers might be could be answering, but maybe take another comment. I think we have also with us Professor Ahmed, the Provost of the Center for Strategic and Research Studies at the National Defense College of Nigeria. If I could give him the floor, if he is he with us in the room? Yes. If he's not with us, I think you. Can you?
Thank you. My name is Annika Hansen. I'm with the Center for International Peace Operations, CIF, in Berlin. Thank you so much. This has been a very rich presentation of a number of the challenges that face peace operations, and I look forward to going into more detail also in the working group discussions. I wanted to pick up on one particular aspect. I had worked with the UN colleagues on the development of the strategy for digital transformation of UN peace operations, and in the process of working on that strategy, we very much underline both the opportunities and the threats that lie in the role of digital transformation, digital technologies as they relate to peace operations. I think in recent times, the question of disinformation, which we'll get into tomorrow, and I look forward to that discussion, has really looked at the negative sides of new technologies. But I was thinking in terms of what you were saying, Cynthia, about how that affects youth in particular, whether or not we can turn it around. And do we have an opportunity, in fact, through digital technologies to be more inclusive, specifically targeting youth and the voice of youth in a number of these inclusive processes? So that would be my question, to see how can we maybe have a more positive approach and see what possibilities do we have really to engage more broadly and bring more voices into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's take one more question, and then we go to some comments from our panelists. Yes, I think there's a gentleman in front here. If you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chair. This is in context of what the Under Secretary General Peace Operations mentioned regarding the diversity of peace operations. Now, I would like to point out that we have a number of operations going on, or a fair amount of tension going on in the maritime domain. You take South China Sea, you take the case of the recent tensions which happened there, you take the case of Greece, you also take the case of certain countries junking the decisions of PCA. So therefore, there is a need. And when we are talking of preventive peace measures, then I think we need to very seriously look at these areas where the conflicts may emerge, because there have been certain unprecedented tensions. So in that case, I would like the UN to consider very seriously regarding maritime peacekeepers and maritime peace operations, and preventive maritime deployment in some manner, that we could perhaps prevent some of these things which are happening. Although a number of them are happening in Indo-Pacific, but then other parts of the world like Greece also is facing such kind of problems. So this is one suggestion which I would like to give. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll stop at this first round of questions and take some comments. I know, Jean-Pierre, there were two questions. The first question was on how can we insulate UN-AU partnership a bit from some of the political dynamics around these issues. If you want to reflect more broadly on the UN-AU collaboration on peace operations. And then the second on maritime security, maritime peacekeepers. Thank you.
Well, I think the more divided our Security Council is, and the more important for us is to work with those who can help us make up for this sort of weak level of support and engagement and unity from the Security Council, particularly from the P5. Now, and there's no question that we absolutely need this partnership with the African Union. Indeed, the more we can team up with the African Union and also with the sub-regional organization, particularly in Africa, and particularly on political efforts, and the more effective we are within the limits of the current division in the international community. Now, to me, the question really is, it's a question of political will. And the question is, I mean, we know how divided our membership is at the UN, but I think that we need as much commitment as possible from the members of the AU and the members of the sub-regional organization in Africa to make these organizations strong. I think it's a very important point there, because these organizations also depend on the political will of these of their membership, and particularly the most influential member states. Now, just a point on the financing. I don't want to repeat myself, but I think financing is critical for peace enforcement operation. But financing is not the only issue to me, and I think again there has to be a more substantial debate on this. I'm a bit concerned that you know, everybody's kind of sticking to positions, you know, without really engaging in a debate that would have to touch on other issues, such as what kind of enforcement, multilateral or regional operation are more effective. What about the question of accountability? Because inevitably those who would be paying will want to have some degree of accountability. It's a fact of life, and so on and so forth. I just want to touch briefly on the digital transformation, just to say, I mean, I will not cover everything, but regarding disinformation and engaging youth with social media, I think we definitely need to be much more proactive when it comes to our communication on social media, and because once the fake news is there, then it's too late. So we have to be much more proactive in telling our own story, and you know, the difference that our collective efforts are making. But I think there's also something which is more fundamental, and this is an issue that has been raised many times by our Secretary General Antonio Guterres. That's the economic model of social media. I mean, as long as we have social medias that are with an economic model that essentially emphasizes the most sort of controversial, the more negative messages, then we have a problem. And I think that goes way beyond the question of peace and security, but has a major impact on peace and security. Now, maritime prevention, maritime peacekeeping, absolutely. I mean, the challenges are increasing on the maritime dimension of peace and security. By the way, we already have a peacekeeping mission, which is partly of a maritime nature in Lebanon. And interestingly enough, we may see a growing relevance of these maritime task force. And this is very hypothetical, but if the current discussion between Israel and Lebanon on the maritime delineation, or to be more specific, the exploitation of natural gas resources come to fruition. Now, of course, the challenge with the maritime peacekeeping, I mean, of course, there needs to be an agreement with member states, the Security Council, all that kind of thing, if we're talking about UN, but there are other configurations that are already incipient, some of them in the Gulf of Guinea, and we saw that also off the coast of Somalia. So we're not starting from nothing. There has been already a number of experiments, some of them quite successful. I'm thinking in particular of the Somalia case against piracy. The resources that are needed, of course, are very significant. The challenges of bringing together those kind of resources is all the more daunting now that the demand for maritime security and the use of maritime assets is really very high these days. And then perhaps coming back, and I don't want to be too long, but the digital dimension. We're talking about disinformation, security, better planning, and all that kind of thing. But we're seeing with the recent events that having a digital understanding of the terrain, the battlefield, and peacekeeping doesn't have battlefield, but it has a duty to protect civilians and therefore to prevent threats. We're seeing with the current conflict how critical the understanding, the digital understanding, or the understanding with the help of digital technology of the dynamic of conflict is absolutely critical and really makes the fundamental difference. I think that we also have to be aware of that, because this is something that peacekeeping will have to address as well if we don't want to be behind the curve. And I will stop here.
Thank you very much. I think for on answering some of the points made. particularly important one on this digitalization issue that has been mentioned. Elizabeth, you wanted to intervene on some points?
Yeah, thank you so much. I wanted to pick up on a few points. First of all, on the point, on Cynthia's point about the need to be partnering with governments when we're talking about peace building and peacekeeping, absolutely so. And I perhaps should have mentioned that in my intervention, but with 3 minutes, I cut straight to local and the broader society. But absolutely, in fact, it would be impossible to do our work without that partnership with government. So for example, for peacekeeping operations, you have to sign a status of forces agreement with the government. There's no way that you would even be there without that relationship with governments. And I would say that throughout our peace and security work, and in particular in the area of peace building, one of our cardinal principles is national ownership. So that for me, that's sine qua non, and perhaps that's why I didn't flag it in particular. And when I say national ownership, I also do mean the broader society, but the national ownership obviously starts with the governments themselves. But this issue of capacity building the capacities of governments in countries where we work, where often there are weak institutions, as our chair has mentioned, that's definitely a critical area of work. And it's both crucial for the sustainability of our efforts, as well as what Cynthia mentioned, to help build the legitimacy of the local institutions, of the local governmental and other institutions. If we're not doing that, obviously we're not doing our job. So definitely I see that as very important. And on that point, I would just also like to link it to some opportunities that I see for greater South-South and triangular cooperation in the area of peace building, in order to help that sort of institution building component of peace building. I know India is one of the champions of South-South, and I think that peer-to-peer support is something that could be quite potent. So again, the UN doesn't have to do it all, and not everything has to pass through us. Secondly, very quickly on the issue of youth, the opportunity through digital technologies to harness youth. I won't go particularly to the digital. I think definitely there should be huge opportunities in that respect. I'm not an expert on the matter, but I do like the point of trying to look also at the positive aspect of these new technologies and of the ubiquity now of social media. Yes, there is a lot of misinformation and hate speech and very negative things coming out of a lot of social media platforms, which we have seen also, we have documented. We can link up to increasing tensions, often in particular contexts, leading even to conflict, violent conflict. But there is the positive side, and I think we absolutely need to look at that and leverage it. But I just wanted to say on the youth issue, inclusion of youth, that we do have some exciting opportunities within the UN, and certainly also partnering with AU and others. We have the Youth Peace and Security Agenda, which is newer than the Women Peace and Security Agenda. And I think there's lots of opportunities there. We're trying to support regions, and including regional organizations as well as countries, to develop their own action plans on youth peace and security, which I think could be great starting points to really bring youth not only into the conversation, but as actors, as protagonists, as decision makers. And the membership, the UN membership, just approved a few weeks ago the creation of a new youth office at the United Nations, which is supposed to be an advocacy platform for youth to work across the spectrum. So I think there's some interesting opportunities we need to try to leverage. Maybe that can be discussed in some of the working groups. And then finally on prevention, just to say that fully agree that we need to see how to do more and better prevention. And often we focus on gathering good data and doing is something that we can do fairly successfully, but it's the early action that we have a lot of problems with. That's really the tricky one. And simply to say, I mean, again, we could spend the entire rest of the day talking about that, but when it comes to actually early action to prevent, sometimes I think we have to admit that the UN just doesn't have the political space in certain areas, in certain country or regional contexts, to do that early prevention work, the early action. So sometimes we really need to support from behind, either supporting regional, sub-regional organizations to try to do the job, or supporting and strengthening local capacity for prevention. I think we need to leverage all tools when it comes to prevention, and sometimes within the UN, it may not be the political area that can come to the fore for prevention, but we might, with high-level interventions, but we might be able to do some work more discreetly in other ways. So I definitely think we need to continue to work more on how we can do this more successfully. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're coming to a close to our panel, but I want to give the floor to Cynthia also if she wishes to make a final comment before we close.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Abdel Latif. I'll respond to just two questions. The first, which was raised by David from the Institute for Security Studies, which is on increasing the role of regions. I think as a regional representative, it would be remiss if I don't touch on that. And then on Annika's question regarding how do we become more inclusive when it comes to using social media. And I'll start with the latter, which is, I'll go back again to the interconnectedness of issues. So there is no way we can make social media inclusive if we don't address inequality, because that determines who gets access to data, that determines who gets access to social media platforms, and who gets access to the digital technologies that we use. And now if we speak about inequality, we also need to speak about it in two ways. The first being institutional capacity of governments to actually invest in infrastructures that bridge the gap between those who have and those who do not have within a country. So we're looking at infrastructure and within the ICT sectors that enables youth either in rural areas or in less privileged communities to have access to data and various technologies. But we're also looking at institutional capacities where we're actually engaging the civilian population and saying, within your constituency, if your government does not do 1, 2, 3, are you capacitated enough to ask your councillor or your representative in parliament to say you got such so and so funds to invest in this and you did not do that? So I think institutional capacity then plays a role in that. And then finally, in terms of increasing the role of regions, particularly in the Southern Africa region, with the exception rather of Mozambique, which recently got into conflict. I think we've seen that we, compared to other regions on the continent, Southern Africa was relatively peaceful for years. So the nature of conflicts within that region varies from what we have seen, either rampant terrorism within West Africa or other insurgencies in other parts of the continent. So we actually see that within the Southern Africa region, what we face most is climate change as a common denominator that affects various countries. I'll give reference to Cyclone Adeoye, which affected Zimbabwe, which affected Malawi, which also affected parts of Mozambique. So these are 3 countries affected by climate change, which exacerbates then conditions that result in people going back to conflicts. So there is need to have those regional mechanisms such as the SADC again capacitated to be able to coordinate and enhance their efforts when it comes to responding to climate change, and the need to understand that as sort of a factor that exacerbates conflicts within the region, because this varies from region to region on the continent. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. With this, we'll bring to a close our panel. Just to thank all our distinguished speakers and the participants from the audience for what has been, I think, a very, very rich discussion. Prepares us well for the work of the working groups. Very difficult to summarize, but if I could maybe point to three key takeaways. I would say first, leadership in a time. Oh, sorry. Sure. Yeah, we're going to close. So I mean, again, leadership, partnership, and innovation. We need partnership in action to address some of the issues we have faced, including with regional organizations. And maybe just a word coming from Egypt, we'll be hosting COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in a few months, where the issue of one of the challenges of climate and peace will be also brought forward by the COP Egyptian presidency. So we look forward, if some of you will join, to have you there to continue at least this part of the conversation.
Thanks to our eminent panelists for a very focused presentation. And I think it acts as a curtain raiser for our group discussions or the follow-up sessions which will come. Now I'll request Panila to come and introduce the working group discussion, which are planned after the lunch. And after this, we'll break for the lunch, and all are requested to reassemble in their respective room for the group discussion. And group discussion, there is a break at 3:30, that is the tea break. Tea break will be the courtyard only, but when we go down, first will be the group photograph, then followed by the tea break. One announcement, we had been requesting all the participants, there's all those who are interested in a trip to Agra, which is scheduled for 8th of October, morning, somewhere between 6 to 7 o'clock we will leave. It is a full day trip, we'll be back only in the night. So those who are desirous to go, during lunchtime, there will be counter. You can go there. It is on the individual's choice. It is not a group planning. And one individual, whosoever wants to go, they will be paying for it. But I'll request those people, those who are leaving by 8th late night flight, they should not venture out, because in case due to some reason, if you get delayed, here you have to report at the airport 4 hours before your flight departures. So keep that aspect in mind. Over to Panila.
Hi again, everyone. I will not stand long between you and your lunch, so I tried to be very brief. We just wanted to inform that we are now, after lunch, moving into a core part of the Challenges Annual Forum, which is actually the working groups. And we will have 3 working groups: preventive deployment, protection of civilians, and protecting the protectors. There is a 90 minutes the first block is 90 minutes, then there will be a tea break, and then there will be another 60 minutes. So basically guiding you in these working groups, you will have a chair, you will have an Ignite speaker, and you will have a field expert, someone from a UN peacekeeping operation. And you will also have someone from me and my team in your group. So the most important here is really to discuss and try to really dwell into the issue and to try to come up with some tangible suggestions for how to move forward. So I would suggest that you spend the first 90 minutes really discussing, and the last 60 minutes really to come up with something that you can bring forward, because this discussion will then be brought into the marketplace, which you will see on day 2 when we will discuss with each other. And then it also goes into the other session, which is the takeaway, and the final session that we have on the future of peace operations. So really do your best to sharpen your brains and be on the alert this afternoon, and really come up with the, as I said previously earlier today, bold suggestions are welcome. If there is any doubt which group you are in, there should be a list on the door of the working groups. One working group will be here. Now I look at my team because now I'm confused. This is Protect the Protectors? Protect the Protectors in this room. Then we have conference room 1 and conference 2. And in conference room 1, it's protection of civilian. And in conference 2, it's preventive deployment. But just look outside the door if you don't know where you belong, and you will find it. Any questions? Everybody wants lunch. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.